Megan, and I'm the Public Development Coordinator for the Peninsula Program of Ecology's Southwest Office. I'll just introduce the housekeeping and make a quick statement before we get rolling with the presentation. There's restrooms just the next door down. That way, if you go through the hall, or at the other end of the building. I want to acknowledge too that Peninsula is double booked tonight, and I want to say thanks for coming here. I know a lot of folks in the room probably had to make a decision about where you wanted, which public meeting you wanted to go to tonight. We did schedule this event a little bit before the town hall meeting was on the books, and this is my lesson to kind of keep checking back in and make sure that there's not somebody else that I need to follow up with in town. But just for anybody that you know that didn't make it tonight, we are going to have our presentation materials posted on our website, which you can find by Googling. I'll put it on all of our Peninsula Harbor sites, but if you just Google Ecology Rayonier Mill cleanup, then that'll get you there pretty fast. So within a few working days, we'll have the slides up for tonight and all of well, we don't have any other materials, but the slides will be there. And we have a lot to talk about tonight. It's been a while since we've been in town, so I want to prepare you in advance. This is going to be a very full presentation, and it's going to be kind of long. So we're asking more of you. We're probably going to take about an hour to go through all of our cleanup work in the harbor right now. As we move through the talk, you're welcome to ask questions as they come up, since there's so much information that's going to come. We won't ask that you hold your questions till the end, but we are reserving some time at the end of the evening for just Q&A and a little bit more discussion. All right, any other facilities questions anyone has? Are you ready to just get rolling? Okay, great, more than ready, hey? Okay, Rebecca Lawson will start us off. She is the section manager of the Toxic Cleanup Program in the Southwest Regional Office of Ecology, and she's probably familiar. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for coming tonight. This presentation is split up into 3 different parts, so I'll do a piece, Marion does a piece, and Connie does a piece. And so if you want to ask questions, it might be best to ask them before we move on to the next presenter, because they can get kind of lost, because we are covering a lot of material tonight. So we have, let's see how it is. Okay. As you can see, we have a lot of cleanup work going on in the harbor and around the harbor. Most of you are familiar with the Rayonier Mill site that is going on in any of us would like. But we also have work going on in the western part of the harbor. There's a separate field area there. And we just completed a cleanup at K5, which was a great success, and that actually happened fairly quickly. We also have actions going on at a number of other bulk fuel terminals, and we'll be touching on all of our work tonight, so that's why it's a little long. Okay, this is a very busy diagram, but we had to create this diagram to help us understand how the pieces fit together with the Peninsula harbor. My section took over My section took over the Rayonier Mill site back in 2008, and at that point we were pretty stuck with Rayonier. Rayonier and Ecology disagreed about how far the site extended, how far contamination from the Rayonier facility extended out into the harbor and off of the mill property. So we decided to enter into an agreement with them for them to investigate and determine cleanup options for a portion of the site called the study area, which I'll show in just a moment. On a parallel path, we conducted an off-property soil dioxin study. Rayonier had a stack. They burned hog fuel, which is salt-laden wood, and there are dioxins in those air emissions. And we looked off of the property and we found some elevated levels of dioxins kind of off in this direction here. Some of you might remember that study if you were here then. We did find some elevated levels, but fortunately none of them are high enough where we needed to take immediate action. So we have kind of parked that effort for now to focus on the harbor and the upland of the mill site. We also conducted, back in 2008, a comprehensive investigation of the sediments in Port Angeles Harbor. And to our surprise, we found a separate source area in the western part of the harbor that was not from Rayonier. So we needed to find out who the responsible parties were. We've engaged them. We have an agreed order with them, and I'll talk a little more about who them are. But we're working under an agreed order to do a remedial investigation and feasibility study for the western part of the harbor. So we've got these two cleanups going on in parallel, and then we're also involved in the natural resource damage assessment process, which is a federal law that addresses injury from the release of hazardous substances to the environment, so to the habitat, to the biota. And that is a separate process. So we're trying to coordinate all of these different processes to ultimately get to cleanup and restoration of Port Angeles Harbor. So it's a lot. We really did have to sit down and say, my God, how are all these things related? How do they fit together? So here's a map of the harbor. So Rayonier, this is Rayonier's study area. They're doing the remedial investigation feasibility study. They'll come up with a cleanup plan for that area. And then the western Port Angeles Harbor area is under a similar process. And you'll see these yellow dots here. Those were all locations of old hog fuel boilers. And as I said, they emitted air emissions that contain dioxin. So we have some dioxin contamination spread throughout the harbor. And we don't really know where the dioxins from one hog fuel boiler begin and another ends. So that has been one of the complicating factors in us getting our arms around this harbor and moving forward with cleanup. So I'll step back now and talk a little bit about our state cleanup law, the Monotoxics Control Act, or MODCA as we call it. We have a lot of acronyms, it's true. So after site discovery, we do a site hazard assessment and hazard ranking. And a lot of times the public gets really locked into that hazard ranking. It can be from a 1 to a 5, and a 1 is the highest priority. And it's just used as a prioritization tool, because as you can see, we're doing that before we do the remedial investigation, which is where we define the nature and extent of contamination. So again, the hazard ranking is just a tool we use to prioritize. So after we delineate the extent of contamination under the remedial investigation, we do the feasibility study, which is where we evaluate cleanup options that will address the contamination. We can also do interim actions anywhere along the process. And the interim action would be something, if we had some highly contaminated soil and we knew we could just dig it out now and get it out of there, we could go ahead and do that instead of waiting for this longer process to play out. And Rayonier has done a lot of interim actions on the upland property that Marion's going to talk a little more about. So after we do the remedial investigation and feasibility study, we develop a cleanup action plan, and that is the selected remedy. That's the action that's going to be taken to clean up the contamination. And that is implemented under a subsequent legal agreement either an agreed order or a consent decree. And then once the cleanup's done, there's monitoring to ensure that the cleanup was effective. So that's kind of a snapshot of our state cleanup process. I'd like to talk a minute about the stakeholders for our work in Port Angeles. For the Rayonier Mill, of course, there's Rayonier, but the Department of Natural Resources is also a liable party because they own and manage the leases in the harbor. So that makes them a liable party under our state cleanup law. For the Western Port Angeles Harbor, we've identified 7 potentially liable parties. 5 of those have stepped up to the plate and are working very cooperatively with us. And those are Maryland Ring, the City of Port Angeles, the Port of Port Angeles, Georgia Pacific, and Nippon. So we're working very cooperatively with them to complete a remedial investigation and feasibility study right now under an agreed order. The Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe is also a key player in our work. They have a very unique concurrence agreement between EPA Ecology and the Lower Elwha, and they weigh in at key decision points throughout the cleanup process, and we work very closely with them and keep them in the loop along the way. The Port Gamble and Jamestown have also been interested in our work. And this natural resource damage assessment process, there is a trustee council that oversees that work. And the trustee council is made up of state, federal, and tribal agencies. So the trustees are the Lower Elwha, the Jamestown Port Gamble, Ecology, NOAA, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're collectively working together to explore restoration opportunities with Rayonier in the eastern part of the harbor, and then on a parallel path with the Western Harbor Group for the Western Harbor. And in addition to being a liable party sometimes, the city and the port are the local jurisdictions. Yes, sir?
Is there an active NERDA assessment for Rayonier Mill?
There is a preliminary assessment for the harbor. Is there 2? 2. There are 2, one for the study area and one for the rest of the harbor. Okay, and then Clallam County Health also has an interest as a local jurisdiction. Sorry. Okay. Port Angeles Business Association, my friends at PAVA, I've been there many times to present. They're very interested in our work, and I know that there is a lot of frustration when everyone in the community looks and sees that property sitting there and nothing's happening. We are working very hard, but we're not here and you're not in our office, and I know it's hard for you to understand why it could possibly be taking so long. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Rebecca, the initial thing that you mentioned when you started your presentation was that the Department of Ecology made an agreement or allowed, or I'm not sure the right terminology.
Agreed order, it's called.
Well, with Rayonier to do its own investigation.
We oversee it.
Nevertheless, and as opposed to an independent third party, Rayonier sort of investigating or sort of taking responsibility for advising the Department of Ecology regarding its own cleanup. And I'm just, that's
not the way it works.
That's not the way it works.
No, the agreed order, Ecology lays out the requirements. Rayonier, in this case, hires an environmental consultant to do the work, but Ecology is overseeing the work all along the way and reviewing the work, approving the work. So it's called oversight by the Department of Ecology. Yes,
I have a question. Is there any timeline in this agreement?
yes, there is a timeline, and the way the schedules are set up in agreed orders, they hinge off of other things. As an example, The due date may be worded something like, within 30 days of the effective date of the order, Rayonier needs to submit a work plan to do a remedial investigation. They submit the work plan. Ecology does not have a set legal timeline to complete the review. We endeavor to do it within 45 days, but it often takes longer. So we have these timelines that hinge off of other things, but if it gets stalled at any point along the way, there's a ripple effect with how quickly things get done. And that is true, that's a fact. Okay, the Olympic Environmental Council, Darlene Schanfeld is involved with that group. And then also the North Olympic Land Trust has been interested and involved in the past. Okay, just a little bit more about NERDA, just trying to touch it lightly. Again, the release of hazardous substances causes injury to the environment, and that injury is converted into a damage that the liable parties need to pay to make the public whole, basically. And that payment can be monetary. They could pay money, and the trustee council would work to implement a restoration project or multiple restoration projects, or the liable party can conduct a restoration project themselves with involvement from the trustee council. So that's a little bit more about how that works. Okay. Okay. Wow. Yeah, it's touchy. This is brand new. I've never used it before. I apologize. Okay. And there's a lot of stuff on that slide. Okay. Some of you might remember this graphic. Back in 2010, the Lower Elwha worked with Rayonier and came up with a conceptual restoration plan for Ennis Creek. And this is one of the concepts that we're looking at with Rayonier as part of that natural resource damage assessment process. Okay.
Will that map be online?
It'll be, there's copies of the presentation, and I think it'll be posted, so it'll be in there. This is really...
Maybe hit the button on the computer instead?
I don't know. We'll see. It's okay, I'm sure I have the magic touch. I'm not going to get in trouble. So why is it taking so long? It has been a long time. And as you can see from our arrow diagram, as we call it, there are a lot of complexities involved. And we thought we were just dealing with the Rayonier mill site, and then we discovered the source in the western part of the harbor. And then the natural resource damage assessment process overlaid on top of that. There are a lot of irons in the fire. Yes, ma'am?
I just have a quick question. When was the last time that there was an active cleanup process happening? I mean, physical cleanup?
No. Great question.
At the Rayonier mill site?
Yes.
Well, I guess that would have been related to the combined sewer overflow.
Which was in 2013, 2014 time. Sewer overflow, but that had nothing to do with the Rayonier mill.
Well, the pipe ran across the mill, so we had to address, and again, that was an interim action. That's a good example of an interim action. The pipe had to cross the property, so we needed to address any contamination along the line.
Okay, so we minus that.
Okay.
When was the last time that they actually physically went and cleaned up the site from Rayonier?
In the early 2000 timeframe,
Yeah.
is when they did their...
Been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
Say that again?
So
Been a long time.
The last time there was any cleanup done at the Rayonier site that wasn't a sewer line was in the early 2000s. Is that
That's
correct?
That's
Like
correct.
2001, 2002?
It's 2017 now.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yep, it is. It is. Yes, sir, question back there?
So the large pile of dirt that was removed about 4 years ago, was that from the installation of the sewer, or was that a cleanup component?
Well, it was both. I mean, it was done to provide for the alignment of the combined sewer overflow, but it was also an interim cleanup action just because it went across the Rayonier.
Right. So it is relatively recently that Rayonier did something.
Yes. Yes, actually, you know, not to delay this too long, I know there's a lot of other information to cover, but, you know, Rayonier did partner with the city and Ecology to provide combined sewer overflow, which is a great thing for the harbor, right? Great, great improvement. So that is a very important project that was completed. Yes, sir?
Why did the K-ply, which had multiple PLPs, clean so quickly?
Right.
And that was a complex, large site,
Yeah, well,
and Rayonier isn't.
Right.
What can you do like K-ply? I mean,
Well-
why did K-ply go so fast?
okay, I can answer that. First of all, K-ply is nowhere near as complex as the harbor. It's just not even in the same universe from a cleanup standpoint. The second reason is the Port of Port Angeles stepped up to the plate and got the work done. We provided some remedial action grant funding, which we can provide to local governments, which helped. But it really is the difference in having a liable party that's willing to step up to the plate. And yes, there are other liable parties, but our state cleanup law is joint several liability. So the port in this case, just by virtue of owning the property, they're a liable party. But they can, through the courts, cost recover from other liable parties. And from from Ecology's standpoint, we just need one liable party to step up and cooperate with us and do the cleanup. And that's what the port did. And that's why it moved so quickly.
So implicitly then, Rayonier is not
Stepping up.
and acting, you know, Rayonier being, you know, a multi-million, you know, they are not stepping up, but they threw a bone by assisting with the sewer situation. And that, to me, just this honoring them for that is almost insulting to the city by saying, oh, well, at least they did this, when the reality is that they're not stepping up. And the department, I'm assuming, doesn't have the resources or the manpower to fight this huge corporation who, you know, just keeps putting it off, and nobody's suing them.
Well, there is a process and there are grounds for suing, and I don't know that the track record would warrant that, quite frankly. I don't disagree that things have taken a long time. There's a lot of caution, but you know, Rayonier is a corporation. They have their own corporate interests. It doesn't mean that they're being recalcitrant and not doing anything. It can just take some time to reach agreement. They're interested in finality. They're interested in settling all their liability, and that's really why they do continue to work with us. They do have an interest, a corporate interest in settling their liability. And it is taking a long time. Yes,
Sorry.
No.
Were they notified that we were having this, and were they invited?
Yes, they are aware that we're having this meeting tonight. We've shared our PowerPoint slides with them. They're in Florida, so.
Just wondered.
Yeah, and them being on the other side of the country doesn't make it easier, right? I mean, if they were here. Yes, ma'am.
Are you saying then that the Department of Ecology lacks the muscle or whatever to get Rayonier to move? I mean, this is a long time for the company to tie up a small town like this that they profited from for many years.
What I'm saying is there is a whole legal component, and I can tell you, trying to sue a liable party is a quick way to not have anything happen. I know that some of you feel like, well, nothing's really happening anyway, but I can tell you, if we end up in litigation, there will be clamped down, nothing will happen. And I can't even imagine how long it would take to come out of that. So that is not our choice, and it doesn't mean that Rayonier is just walking all over us either. It means we're trying to work with them, trying to find the common interest, because they do have an interest in settling their liability.
What is their, I don't understand what their interest would be. I don't see what financial incentive or any pressure they feel to do this until forced. Because it's a site they're not using the site. The site is defunct. And so the idea of getting it resolved, it's not like there's a contractor has put a lien against them so that they can't do anything else with their business until they take care of this. There really isn't an incentive, except it might be a blip on their SEC filings, but very honestly, it's nothing to them. It's absolutely nothing. And it almost sounds like the Department of Ecology is, it's like, what side is the Department of Ecology, which is Washington State, which is us, all of us here, what side are you guys on to sort of, it's almost being an apologist for Rayonier. I mean, that's what I'm personally hearing is, well, and the reality is they're not incented to do anything, because if they were, they'd do it.
I understand that's your perspective, and I don't want to speak for Rayonier, but maybe you should ask Rayonier, because I think they would say they feel like they are doing things. And again, I don't want to get into talking for them at all. I understand your perspective, and I agree, it's taking a long time.
I have to bring up one other issue. As the site remains, it's owned by Rayonier, but it's empty, then it's a home for homeless. So we've had that issue.
Yes, we have just recently become aware of that, and as has Rayonier as well.
I think there's a point to be made too, that there was different management at the time the mill closed up until you took it over. And there was then new management at Rayonier that was more willing to work with ecology.
Yes.
So there's some years there where they did get away with a lot, but things haven't since.
I think they have, but again, I'm right there with you. It hasn't happened fast enough for me.
Well, I mean, the reality is a trial doesn't take 15 years. You're saying that litigation would slow it up. It's hard to imagine it getting any slower than what has happened so far.
Well, I don't know if you've been involved in any litigation, but that is a lot of gridlock.
What is a reasonable amount of time for Rayonier to be finished?
Okay, well, you're not going to like this answer either. This is something that's just recently been in the last year or two. I have realized that once we have a remedy ready to implement for the harbor, it is going to take multiple years to implement that work. It's probably going to take 4 to 7 years. That's a big harbor. The entire harbor, I think, is over 1,800 acres. There are permits that are needed to do the in-water work. Sometimes they can take a year to obtain. Work can only be done at certain times of the year to allow for fish passage. So it's once we have the remedy going, it is going to take a long time. But I'm hoping that once the community actually sees some equipment out there, some barges in the harbor doing work, some action happening on the property, then it'll be more real that something is actually happening.
When you say once the remedy has been implemented.
Has been selected, yeah.
Yeah, but how long does it take for ecology to develop that remedy, which, for something that's been going on this long? If it's going to take 5 to 7 years to put it into service. How long does it take them for the remedy, for you folks to come up with the remedy?
Well, where we are right now with the Rayonier Mill study area, we've completed the upland remedial investigation. We've completed the sediments remedial investigation for that area there in the blue. Those documents are available on our website if people want to look at them. We're in the process, Raynier's in the process of completing the feasibility study for both the upland and that portion of the marine.
How long have they been working on that, can I ask?
All of them, or the feasibility
The
study?
feasibility.
They submitted a draft feasibility study in 2015.
When were they initially given the responsibility of conducting their own feasibility study? What year?
So the agreed order that lays out the task for doing both the remedial investigation and the feasibility study was signed in March of 2010.
So it took them 5 years to
Even get started.
To get to that point.
And part of that is that schedule that Rebecca was talking about of, first we needed them to complete the remedial investigations, and then they have so much time to start working on the feasibility study. So it was a sequential process to get to that feasibility study.
Right, and how long do they have to complete it?
Right now, Rayonier is waiting to get final comments back from us. They submitted a draft of the feasibility study, and there were a lot of changes required because we had a new sediment standard regulation come out that were significant changes. It provided for protection of human health from bioaccumulative chemicals, which the old regulation did not do that. And what that means is there's contamination in the sediments, the fish or the crab uptake the contamination from the sediments, we eat them, and it accumulates in us. And so the new sediment management standards are more rigorous than the former. And when that new regulation came out, we spent the last 2 years working through how the feasibility study needs to change to meet the requirements of the new sediment management standard.
And so when do you think you're gonna have your portion figured out? So that they can continue and
Well,
make their feasibility?
Yeah, well, within the next month, the comments
Yes,
should
within
go
this
out.
month of May, I hope to send those final comments.
And from that time that you send your comments, how much more time are they given to make the changes to their feasibility study and where you guys can negotiate into an agreement?
I believe the agreed order requires them to revise it within 75 calendar days. It is possible they will request an extension because there are major revisions that need to happen. So it may take longer than those 75 calendar days.
Does the Department of Ecology have a budget specific to managing our area? Is there a budget specifically designed where you have to work within this budget to negotiate with Rayonier and do all of this stuff, and you guys have whatever?
Yeah, the way that my staff are funded and myself to work on this is through cost recovery. Rayonier pays for our time through the agreed order. So we send them bills for our time here tonight, the costs of this meeting. Rayonier will have a share in that.
Is there a budget cap?
No, it's just cost recovery. It's
Okay.
the time that we spend.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
One more question to put this into some sort of have a whole picture. Rayonier owns land all over this country, has abandoned many sites. How fast have they cleaned up other sites?
I have no information about how quickly they've cleaned up other sites in other parts of the
Or
country.
even if they have?
I don't know.
How would one find out?
I guess I would try to Google it. I don't know, that's where I would start. I'm sure there's information available on the internet.
So you don't benchmark yourself against other states that do this to see how well you're doing?
No, we don't. No, we
Yes, sir.
It sounds, I've got a two-parter. It sounds a little bit like ecology's making money as long as this drags on and on because you bill them for your time. But the second part, and more important part of my question is, all of those potentially liable partners that were listed there had something to do with creating the toxins that went into the bay. Port Angeles doesn't create any of these toxins, and I don't think that they ever produced any wood products. Why is Port Angeles on that list, and why is the county not?
The city of Port Angeles is a liable party because they operated the combined sewer overflows. So those air emissions that we talked about that landed in the harbor, that landed in the upland, some of them found their way and were deposited into the harbor from the combined sewer overflow. And under our state cleanup law, that makes them a liable party.
So sewer is a part of this same cleanup that you're talking about?
It's not the things that you think of that come out of the combined sewer overflow. It's not the bacteria. That's not part of what we clean up under the toxics cleanup program. It would be the dioxins in the sediments.
So how did the dioxins end up in the sewer? Is it from washing down from the streets into the sewer?
And overland flow and
So technically, it was from Rayonier when it washed in.
not just Rayonier, but that's the way our state cleanup law works. Darlene.
And sewage, let me just explain. In sewage, 90,000 chemicals go in, especially from the city, because they have their own treatment plant. Dioxin is a big issue in any.
There's PCBs, there are others.
Yeah, so it's in that. But I also want to mention that Ecology did, with the support of the environmentalists, push Rayonier to do getting a rulemaking, which took a couple of years, for dioxin in soils, the effects on children. And that came close to a lawsuit because Rayonier did not want to do it until they were pushed and almost went to court. So they then folded and cooperated.
If you have, if the law is joint and several liability, okay, Rayonier is the biggest player with the most money and the most expensive lawyers. I mean, is this when you?
Georgia Pacific is a liable party.
Okay, so you have really big entities who are players who are the worst actors. But joint and several liability means you hold all of these different entities accountable, and then they are supposedly supposed to fight it out amongst themselves. Is that correct?
They are all jointly and severally liable.
So you have a tiny entity or something where they don't have the funds to try to fight the big guy to say, hey, wait a minute, our portion of this was only,
Who are you talking about?
Well, you mentioned all the actors, all the people who had some responsibility.
For the Western Port Angeles Harbor.
Okay. So,
I mean, their cost allocation is their business. Ecology's not involved in that.
But do you understand? I think that the way the law is set up, that there wouldn't be an incentive to get things done from the smaller entities, because how do they go after the big guys to make sure that their portion is proportionate when they don't have the funds to fight the big guys to get their money back, when they're sitting there fighting among themselves?
We're kind of getting off into theoretical discussions about joint and several liability under our state cleanup law, which I'd love to talk to you about afterward, but I feel like if I don't get back to this presentation, we may be here a long time. So the new sediment management standards, there were a lot of changes that needed to be incorporated into not just Rayonier's work, but the Western Port Angeles Harbor's work as well. One component of that is a concept called regional background. we as people in an urban environment have some contributions to contamination in the marine environment. And this concept helps us account for that. We took about a year, maybe a little over a year, to do a regional background study. We came out with the North Olympic Peninsula Regional Background Study. That was the last time we were here doing a presentation to the public. It was last April, a year ago April. So that was an important component to have that will influence the cleanup standards that are ultimately set for the harbor. Okay, I want to talk briefly about community involvement. So we do really care about keeping the community informed and updated, and I know it's been about a year since we've been here. Prior to that, I think we were getting up here, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 times a year for various events or to provide updates. So it's very important to us, and if you have ideas about how you could be better informed, we'd really love to hear from you. Our state cleanup law requires that we put key cleanup documents out for public comment. So these remedial investigations, feasibility studies, the cleanup action plan, when those are ready, we will have a 30-day public comment period, and then we'll probably hold a meeting to talk about those documents in detail. So more coming.
Will you post that on your Facebook page when you get that last document submitted? You said you were going to submit.
We'll definitely post it on the website, whether we're using Facebook as a means of notifying the public or not. Maybe Megan can answer.
Yeah, if it is agreed upon that we want to disseminate it through Facebook, we have the capacity to do that. And we had the blog post about this meeting, and that was disseminated through Facebook. So, possibly we could write a blog post kind of giving a short summary and just letting you know about it.
Yeah, I think that's the way it would work. Because not everybody in ecology, we can't just all post stuff on our Facebook page. Okay. Okay. So we have been up here a lot. We've been up here over 28 times in the last 6 years, and we really enjoy your involvement, and these meetings are always spirited, and we really welcome that and appreciate your time and your energy and your input. We've done over 25 public presentations. We've got over 600 folks on our mailing list, and we are trying to explore other ways to get information out, like the Facebook thing is something relatively new to ecology. So we're looking forward to continuing to keep you updated and informed.
Rebecca,
Yes.
may I remind you that OEC did monthly outreach and education all over the city for years, and we've also had several of our technical person come out and give talks.
Yes, OEC had a public participation grant for many years.
Hope you do.
Okay. Any last questions on my slide? They'll be before I hand it off to Mary. Thank you. That's a touchy. We'll do what she says.
So I'm Marion Abbott. I'm Ecology's project manager for the Rayonier Mill site. And I'm going to give just an update of what we have been doing. We've answered some of those questions already here tonight. The Rayonier Mill site had a mill for almost 70 years, from 1930 to 1997. And in 1997, when the mill closed down, Rayonier systematically dismantled the facility, as you can see in the picture on the right. And they also conducted a number of interim actions, and I'll share a figure of where those interim actions took place. Rebecca had shared this slide earlier showing all of the contaminated sites that we're working on in Port Angeles Harbor. The Rayonier Mill site is up here at number 2. So we'll be using this as kind of an anchor slide for all of our updates of all the different sites that we're working on. And in the upper left-hand corner, we're showing where we are in the cleanup process that Rebecca went through. For Rayonier, we have conducted a number of interim actions. Most of the highest contaminated soil has been removed from the property. We are also completed with the remedial investigation for both the upland and the marine part of the site of the study area. And I'll explain a little bit more about why we're focused on that study area versus the site. And we're most of the way through on that feasibility study. So Rebecca talked a little bit about the study area. One of our challenges we've had with the Rayonier Mill site is defining that site boundary. Our cleanup regulation would say you define the site based on where contamination has come to be from the facility, and we have some challenges in agreeing on where that is in sediments, as well as upland from the air emissions that carry dioxins from the hog fuel boilers. So we've reached agreement with Rayonier to focus on a portion of the site, which we call the study area. And this is outlined here. It includes all of the upland property as well as a large part of the marine environment. And it extends out here to where they had a deep water outfall. So this is just a part of the site. It's the area that we've agreed to focus on our studies and evaluating cleanup alternatives. And we have an agreed order that we entered into in March of 2010 to focus on the study area. These are the tasks that are laid out in the agreed order. The ones that are in green are related to the upland. It's where they are to collect data, determine where the contamination is, evaluate the risks from that. So it's the remedial investigation of the upland. And that work has been completed. It's in what we call the Volume 1 report. The blue boxes are similar. They're for the marine environment. Again, collecting data, determining where the contamination is, what are the risks. That work is also completed. It's a Volume 2 report. And both of these volumes are on our website. You are welcome to roll up your sleeves and dig into that data. We are not taking public comment on those reports yet. But I would welcome you to get started in looking at them. The purple boxes are related to that feasibility study. That's where we evaluate cleanup alternatives. Rayonier has submitted an agency review draft in 2015, which we are working through. This is a schematic of the process facility here of how the material moved through. So Rayonier operated an acid sulfide plant to take wood chips and turn them into pulp. The wood was stored here in the log pond and it moved across the facility to a finishing room where they had their pulp product. And as part of their process, there were leaks from equipment. They had fuel tanks on the facility and the fuel tanks leaked. They had the hog fuel boiler released air emissions, and the air pollution had dioxins in them, and that was carried by the wind. And there were also 5 outfalls that discharged around the log pond and the dock that discharged untreated wastewater from the facility until the 1970s. And by 1972, Rayonier built a treatment plant and collected all of their wastewater, treated it, and then discharged it through that deep water outfall. This figure shows where the interim actions have taken place on the Rayonier property. Rayonier has removed over 30,000 tons of contaminated soil. Most of the contaminated soil was PCB contaminated soil and petroleum contaminated soil. And a lot of it did go to the City of Port Angeles sanitary landfill. Some of it went to a treatment facility in Tacoma. This figure shows where soil samples and groundwater samples have been collected on the Rayonier property. So we've collected quite a lot of data. And here's what we're seeing.
I'm sorry, what was the difference between the blue and the brown dots?
The blue dots, well, it's different phases of sampling that's taken place out on the property. Some of it is conformational sampling where they did those interim action removals. There's also different shapes here. So some of the shapes are squares that would represent monitoring wells, and the more diamond shapes are soil sampling locations. So here's what we have found at the Rayonier facility. We have metals, we have dioxins, we have polyaromatic hydrocarbons or PAHs, we have polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, and we have petroleum, which we shorten to TPH, total petroleum hydrocarbons. So we're seeing all of this in surface water and soil and groundwater. We do tend to see higher concentrations in the surface soil. It's lower in the deeper soils. And it's very spotty and not really a clear pattern because most of the highest contamination has already been removed. We do see more of the contamination over on the West Mill side rather than the East Mill side. This is a figure of the sampling locations in the marine environment. This is that study area. Rayonier has divided the study area into 4 sections. So there's the log pond area, the mill dock. Out here is the deep water outfall, and then we have an in-between zone. And we're finding a lot of the same contamination in the sediments and what has bioaccumulated into the fish and the shellfish, the metals, the PAHs, the PCBs, and the dioxins. Some other testing that they've done is what we call bioassays, and that's where we're testing to see how toxic are the chemicals in the sediments to the critters that are living in the sediments. And what we have found is most of this contamination is in the log pond and around the mill dock, and we do see that it is toxic to the organisms that are living in the sediments. Out by the deep water outfall, the detections we have are below our cleanup levels, and the bioassays are passing out there, so it's not as toxic. So out by the deep water outfall is okay. So we do have a volume 3 report that we've been working through, and some of the cleanup alternatives that Rayonier is looking at is, for the soil, they're looking at dig and haul to an appropriate disposal facility. They're also looking at alternatives that would involve capping the soil with a clean layer of soil on top of some sort of geotextile to help mark where the contaminated soil is, and then put a clean layer of soil on top. And then in the sediment, the cleanup alternatives that they're looking at there is kind of a standard menu of cleanup for sediments. One is to dredge it, dig it all up, and haul it to an appropriate disposal facility. Another option would be to put a layer of clean sediments and cap over the contaminated sediments. And a third option is what we call enhanced natural recovery. So in some areas, there is clean sediment coming in that's always burying the sediments and can bury the contaminated layer and kind of mix with it. Port Angeles Harbor doesn't have a lot of clean sediments coming in, so we could enhance it by putting out a thin layer of clean sediments that would help bury the contaminated sediments and mix in and dilute that contamination. So that's a third option that they're looking at. So here is where we are on our next steps. We are about to provide those final comments on the Volume 3 report, and we would expect to see a revised Volume 3 report later this year. They probably will ask for an extension because there are a lot of revisions that need to happen to that report. And then Ecology will review and approve it, and hopefully be able to approve it, and bring it out for public comment. So we would bring out both Volumes 1, 2, and 3 for public comment in 2018. Based on public comment, Rayonier may need to do some further revisions to those reports. And then once we have them finalized, Rayonier then submits to us a draft action plan for cleanup in the study area. Ecology takes that document, we finalize it, and we would bring that back out to you for public comment. Rebecca talked a bit about the NERDA process, and as she said, Rayonier is very interested in addressing all of their environmental liabilities, both cleanup and natural resource damages. And the NERDA process is going on in parallel with the cleanup process. And we are hopeful that we'll actually be able to have both plans ready to go at about the same time, because then Rayonier can do a single construction project doing both cleanup and restoration.
If Rayonier doesn't finalize their final comments in the draft 3 and keeps wanting more time, can ecology just call it and take it and put in their comments and send it out to the public instead?
We have that provision where we can take over the work and complete the work. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to say.
I mean the document itself so that it gets out to the public. Instead of going back and forth
Yes,
and back and forth and back.
Again, I think there need to be a demonstration that Raynier's not making progress. I mean, if they just refuse to do it, that would be an easier case. But also, to be perfectly honest, right now, we do not have the budget to complete the document ourselves.
But they're paying for it.
Well, not if we, I mean, they could owe us for it, but if we go into litigation, I don't think that they would be paying us while we're trying to finish.
I didn't mean litigation, I meant just saying, Rayonier, this is the drop dead time that you have to make some changes in volume 3. We need it by a certain date, we need to move it.
A timely manner, not 20 more years.
Right.
Well,
No, I
not
know I
even
hear
another
that,
year.
but Darlene, I want to be clear that I think what you said before was, if we said, okay, you haven't done it, so now we're going to do it, we would have to have financial resources to do it ourselves.
To actually organize the cleanup, you mean,
Well, in this
to make,
case, Darlene's talking
to
about
finish the,
completing the report.
okay.
I mean, the same thing would apply
Yeah.
to the cleanup too. But, so that's what I just wanted to clarify.
The PCBs and chemicals that are in the soil, are they somehow chemically bonded to the dirt? Or every time when it rains, does it wash those out and straight in the creek? I'm just thinking over 20 years, you'd think that a lot of those chemicals would just keep flowing out, right? So the ground's getting cleaner every year if they do nothing.
No, actually, the PCBs do bind tightly to the soil particles, so they're not moving very readily through the soil column. But there can be a concern of erosion of soil materials. And that's something I wanted to show with the next 2 slides. We talked a little bit about the project that was a combined effort with the city and Rayonier and Ecology for the city's issues with their combined sewer overflow. The city did purchase one of Raynier's tanks, and then they installed some piping across the Rayonier property. And as they dug to put the pipes in, the soils were turned over to Rayonier to manage. And those are those piles that you're seeing out there, these stockpiles, which we have grassed over to make sure that they don't erode and have soil particles washing away. We have done some initial sampling of these stockpiles, and everything looks like it's meeting cleanup levels except for dioxins. Dioxins are present in the soil stockpiles, but we've only done a very preliminary sampling on them. Rayonier will manage these stockpiles as a part of their overall cleanup of the upland part of their property. So that's my part on Rayonier.
So they're waiting to remove the dirt that's just sitting there then? What is the significance of waiting to take that dirt out?
Some of the dirt is actually clean and will meet cleanup levels, and one of the alternatives that Rayonier's looking at is capping And it may be that some of this soil could be used for that cap. So that's why they're not hauling it away or taking it away. It may be able to be reused on the property.
My concern with capping would be though, if somebody wanted to come in there and dig and put something in, then you're uncapping.
Correct.
How will we ever use that site again?
There would need to be some sort of action to address contamination if there was going to be any sort of building, new development on the property. So one of the things we would have to do is put an environmental covenant on the property to remind future owners and developers that there's contamination out there, and they would need to take care of it at the time that they do the development.
Wow, that's a giant wow.
Why wouldn't we want to cap in the first place then?
We don't.
I wouldn't.
No.
I would be against
It's
it.
probably the cheapest.
Yeah.
That's right, one of the less expensive ones, yes.
But
And
then that affects the, so, and then not being able, I mean, that, it ultimately.
It's a Band-Aid.
It's not the selected remedy. Rayonier is allowed to evaluate a variety of alternatives, and that is one of the alternatives that they're
But
evaluating.
do they make the final decision on which one?
Ecology will present the final decision.
Well, on that valuable, incredibly valuable property, I can't imagine that ecology would even consider capping.
Well, imagine.
Because that would limit its use tremendously.
I'm not even sure you'd want to use it for a park or anything if you wanted to do
I don't-
any, you know.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is there on a capping technique in general, is there a year standard that it's supposed to last? You know, is it, I don't know if we're talking in perpetuity to 100 years, is there some kind of lifetime on that particular technique?
We would expect
Yeah,
we'd expect it to last forever.
in perpetuity.
Yes,
Okay.
in perpetuity, but there would always need to be some maintenance. They may need to add more material, you know,
Gotcha.
or something.
Okay.
There would be alteration of maintenance plan.
Did they remove or did they cap Cape Life?
Connie's going to give you a whole update on Cape Pine, so we could hold on that one. You had a question?
What about the dioxins downwind of that site?
As Rebecca mentioned, we have looked at where the dioxins are. They are lower levels, and so we will get to them, but we have put it on the back burner while we focus on the study area.
Right, so I'm Connie Groveman, and we've reached that point where we're on the downhill side of the presentation, and I'm going to talk about everything that's not Rayonier related. It is 8 o'clock, so if you came specifically for Rayonier and you need to leave, that's all right, I'll understand. But that is okay if you need to do that. So I'm going to move on and talk about Western Harbor and then some of our other upland sites in the harbor. There we go. So going back to this initial slide at the beginning of each site, we're going to talk about the Western Port Angeles site is represented by the number 7 here. And we use this diagram up here to sort of show where we're at in the process. Right now we're working on the remedial investigation, and I know that the Western Harbor Group has started on the feasibility study. Neither of those are finished yet. And that's what is included in their current agreed order. They're required to do those 2 pieces right now. So Rebecca also showed you this map, and I just pop it up here again so you get your bearings. The Western Port Angeles study area encompasses the rest of the harbor out within or inside of the Rayonier study area. We had major mills along the site here, Nippon, which is now McKinley, I hear, Maryland Ring, Fiberboard, K-Fly, were all major mills along here, and those yellow dots were hog fuel boiler locations. Yeah, oh, okay, we might have to go to the other, we might have to go to the other again. Sorry about that. Okay, so progress so far. The Western Harbor Group got out and completed their RI, Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study, RIFS, field work in 2013. In early 2014, they got their report that included all of that data completed. That report's already available on our website if you want to dig into data. Then they began writing their remedial investigation report. And about that time...
It went so smoothly. It went year after year after year. It didn't wait 20-something years.
Oh, well, we did have a little bit of a pause here. About the time they started writing that remedial investigation report, we got those new sediment management standards. It has taken us a couple years to figure out how to work with those new standards. The standards became more strict in that they take a look at human health criteria, and before we were just protecting the critters. Now we're protecting the people too. So the standards are important for us, but it's taken us a while to figure out how's that going to look in a remedial investigation report. So what we did with the Western Harbor Group was we paused our agreed order timeline and asked them to work with us on writing a white paper. And the white paper basically is a summary of how we're going to get through these new regs, what the remedial investigation is going to include, how we're going to set cleanup levels, how we're going to set the site boundaries, what chemicals we're going to focus on. Those are the things that are in the white paper. We've been through one round of white paper and comments. They have just last month turned in the revised white paper. We're now reviewing that. That will either go into some additional comments or that'll be approved. And when that's approved, we go back into our agreed order timeline. And they'll have some time to revise or submit their remedial investigation then. I'm flashing up a few slides here just to give you an idea of what contamination in the western part of the harbor looks like. This is a gradient map for dioxin furans, with the yellow being higher concentrations of dioxins and furans, gradiating out to this blue being the lowest out here. This green, all of the green and above is contamination that's about equal to our regional background value. Rebecca talked about that North Olympic Peninsula regional background value or background study that set what kind of contaminant or what kind of levels we would find just out in the environment from normal human usage, not levels that are found from any source or industrial level. And so that green area gives you an idea of where that sort of background level is. And here's a map for mercury. That's one of the contaminants of concern we have in western Port Angeles Harbor. This area here, this particular map, this light green and above, are areas that are above natural background. Our regional, but I didn't have a map right now with our regional background values on it, but it would be slightly less than the area would be slightly less than these to show the natural background area. So next steps with Western Harbor. Ecology is reviewing that white paper right now. We would hope to have a decision on that this summer. If that is approved, we go right back into our agreed order schedule. We were looking at maybe having that agency review draft in the winter of this year. I'm being optimistic here that we can get over the final hurdles here and get back on schedule. The public review draft then would be out in about the spring of 2018, and we'd be out for public comment on that document in, say, summer of 2018. Okay? Then, beyond this is all their agreed orders requiring them to do right now. We would need a new agreed order for them to actually go into cleanup. Ecology writes the cleanup action plan. Often we have the liable parties draft, the first draft of that, and then ecology takes it and corrects it or changes it or makes it our own, because ecology makes that final decision. So ecology would be drafting this cleanup action plan to implement, but we would need a new agreed order with the Western Harbor group to do this work. I wanted to bring back again that the Western Harbor group is also interested in taking care of all their liability. They're also taking part in this natural resource damage process, which is a separate process that looks at paying back the public for all those years that the habitat was damaged. And so the Western Harbor Group is looking at restoration projects that they could do above and beyond what's required by cleanup to make the public whole. There are some cost savings or potentially cost savings and time savings by integrating those two processes. So even though right now they're separate and parallel, there's a hope that those can be combined, and some of the savings through constructing the restoration and cleanup at the same time could be seen.
Are you saying that the city is on the NERDA team, or I wasn't clear?
The NERDA trustee council is okay. So NERDA trustee council is ecology, NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the 3 tribes. That's the trustee council. And we're working with the liable parties from Western Peninsula Harbor and the liable parties with Rayonier on 2 separate natural resource damage assessment processes. Okay?
Would the NERDA restoration be required to be local? Because like NOAA doesn't have a presence here.
We are definitely interested in local projects. Yeah, we are only focusing on local projects. Because we don't have a feasibility study yet, we don't have options chosen yet. I just wanted to say that there are a limited number of options that are really available for cleanup of sediment in the harbor. And Marion showed you this slide earlier, so I just wanted to say that there will probably be some sort of combination of these types of techniques used to clean up the harbor. There are a few other techniques out there. Adding amendments to the soil to bind up contamination is one of them. By binding the contaminants up with something like activated carbon, you can keep it from being available to the fish and the critters that are out there. But those types of, there's really a limited number of palette of options we can use in the harbor. And we expect the Western Harbor Group will turn in for their feasibility study these types of options and in different combinations for different areas of the harbor. So questions on Western Harbor?
Did they remove the dirt in Cape Fly or did they cap it?
In Cape Fly, we removed the dirt, and I'm going to talk about Cape Fly right now. Okay, well, we'll move on to Cape Fly.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Can you characterize the process of the Western Harbor area cleanup thus far with the PLPs and in comparison to the other cleanup projects that have been completed in the state thus far, and in comparison to Rayonier, we obviously know that's very sluggish compared to this.
Well, I don't know if I can really compare statewide, but I will say that ecology is very pleased with the way the process with the Western Port Angeles Harbor Group has gone. The Western part, right now we're working with the five liable parties, Nippon, Georgia Pacific, Maryland Ring, the city and the port, and those 5 we're calling the Western Port Angeles Harbor Group. Those 5 each have their own legal team, they each have their own consultants, and we've been very pleased with the way that group has worked together as one. They have been easy to work with. We have been able to make progress, and that's, I have to give credit to those liable parties for being cooperative and proactive in their work.
And once again, who has the final say on how it's dealt with? Rather,
Ecology always has the final decision on the cleanup action plan.
and does the community of Port Angeles have some input in that?
Definitely. We come out with the draft cleanup action plan and the agreed order to implement and see what you guys think. Yes?
You mentioned the 5 partners. There were 2 other partners?
There are 2 other partners.
Who are partnering?
And
exactly, or-
Rebecca mentioned earlier that joint and several liability clause in our state laws. Ecology doesn't really need to push to get every party working. As long as somebody steps up to the plate, we're willing to go ahead. Those 5 can always cost recover from the other 2. But that's sort of up to them. But if somebody's willing to step, even if one of them steps up to the plate and says, hey, we're going to take care of this, we're willing to do that, Ecology will work with that one to get the work done. And then cost recovery can happen on the legal side of things. Yes?
If I remember correctly, the 2 that are not part of this group then are state agencies, are they not?
One is DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, and they're in charge of leasing tidelands around our state. The other one is Owens Corning, who's the liable party for the old fiberboard mill. Fiberboard was purchased at one time by the Owens Corning company. And they're back east. They've been notified that they're liable, and I know that they're watching the process, but they haven't stepped up. I don't know if they're in discussion with the Western Port Angeles group or not. Okay, so moving on to K-Ply. So K-Ply is here at number 4, and you can see the cleanup process here. The remedial investigation done, some interactions were done, feasibility study was done, the final cleanup action was done. In fact, they even did their final cleanup, and we're down to the monitoring stage. So this is a real success story, and we like to see this happening. The interim action that took place was demolition of that old mill building, which was falling apart and a fire hazard. And at the same time, it was preventing us from doing a complete investigation and cleanup on this site. So we included removing that as the old mill buildings as part of our first interim action on the site. There were a couple more things there I should mention. So the demolition took place in 2013, 2014. The port who stepped up on this site got out there and finished the investigation so they could get the remedial investigation and feasibility study finished. The cleanup action plan, we were here in 2015 with a cleanup action plan and an agreed order to implement that plan. We came out and did a public meeting about that. That plan was finalized and cleanup started right away and was completed in 2016. Well, now it's going to go again because I pushed it a second time. Nope, it's going to stay. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what the contamination at K-Ply looked like, this is the waterfront with Terminal 1 heading off into the water up there at the top. So the K-Ply building stood on top of this contaminated soil plume. This is actually the groundwater plume here. The orange is gasoline contamination. The blue outlines here were diesel contamination, and the green outlines were hydraulic oil contamination. We knew the hydraulic oil came from the presses, the hydraulic presses within the mills leaked, and we knew where this came from. We were a little stumped at first by the large gasoline plume and even the diesel plume. K-Ply didn't use gasoline in their processes. They did have a few forklifts and things that used diesel, but this was way bigger than really from the mill processes we would expect. As we investigated, what we found was there was a pipeline. There's actually a couple pipes that ran from the Peninsula fuel bulk plant that stood to the south and Terminal 1, and they used to offload the gasoline and diesel to this bulk fuel plant, and this pipeline ran under the K-Ply building. Got a couple pictures there of us uncovering that pipeline and some of the many holes we found in the pipeline. Exxon, General Petroleum that operated these pipelines, and Exxon is the successor or liable party for General Petroleum now. So Exxon was named liable for a good portion of this cleanup.
Could you say again what the colors represent?
Sure.
And also those rings are at the logs in that image.
That's the pipe with the holes in it.
Oh, yes.
They look like
That's
lungs.
That's the pipes that were dug up, and I've circled some of the holes in the pipes. Yeah, the orange here was gasoline contamination, the blue is diesel, and the green is hydraulic fluid.
What about them on red?
I'm calling that shades of orange, from this dark orange to this darkest to the medium.
So that's just more than less.
That's more gasoline, and this being the biggest source area here. Okay, and this is really what led us to suspect this pipeline that ran under the building. You know, where did this big source area come from? And this was underneath the building.
Is it up to the 7 partners then to get any financial relief from Exxon?
So K-Ply is separate from the Western Port Angeles Harbor that has the 7 PLPs. For K-Ply, the PLPs were the port for owning the property. Rayonier, for the time that they owned the property for about 20 years. And we knew that some of the hydraulic fluid contamination, the leaks from the presses, came during the time they owned it. And then we named Exxon for the operation of this pipeline. So 3 PLPs at this site. And I believe your port was very successful, even though they headed this cleanup up, they were successful in cost recovering a good portion of this cleanup, or most of this cleanup, from Exxon and Rayonier. Yes.
I'd love to add right now that our executive director, Karen Goshen, who's in the back, she led that portion for the cost recovery, and the attorneys she worked with were exceptionally successful in that cost recovery and with our own insurance companies. So it was an absolutely fantastic outcome, and we pushed along this process the entire time, pushing, and being really assertive with the other PLPs to make sure that the local public dollars were not being spent on something that didn't necessarily have to be spent on. We did not give up, she did not give up, and so I think the community needs to know that about your port and the executive director that's leading it, and for staff.
Yes?
When all of this pollution was actually ongoing, was it not against the law? And if so, can't the criminal courts speed up the process if it was?
Most of this wasn't known for a long time. We did not realize this was happening. This pipeline was shut down in 1967. So this happened prior to 1967.
Well, the statute of limitations start once it's known, so when it was found out, was it against the law even in 67?
We didn't find this out until recently. That this.
And there is no statute of limitations for.
Well, was that type of pollution against the law, I guess is the main question.
You know, I don't know what laws were in place in the 60s, quite honestly. That predates our state cleanup law. You know, we didn't have that in place then.
Our state cleanup law doesn't prevent us from going after historic contamination.
Well, you're talking about going civilly, and as we know, civil takes a long time, but if it's in the criminal courts, they do it at the judge's time. So I'm wondering if there's any way to speed this up with criminal actions.
We'd have to go to someone legal for that.
I don't think back in that time, and that predates CERCLA, right, federal law even.
So here, let's move on. I brought in a few pictures. We got a real delay here. I brought in a few pictures. We have some great drone pictures from the port of the cleanup taking place here. Just to get you an idea, this is the bulkhead side or the water side down here, and this is Marine Drive back here. As we started digging down to the contaminated soil, so the leaks happened at the surface, but the contamination traveled down through the layers of soil and then moved with the groundwater and through the soil pores. So if the contamination happened back in here where we think it did, down here it was actually down at water level. So maybe down 10 feet, if you can imagine groundwater level being down around 10 feet. So clean soil had to be removed off the top first, and it was stockpiled up in this area. And then the dirty soil was removed, and it came to a stockpile over here where it was loaded into the haul trucks. Let's move to the next slide. You can see it progressing here. And we move back this way. If we had soil that was questionable, whether it was clean or dirty, it was temporarily stockpiled while it was sampled. So we could decide whether to go to the dirty pile or the clean pile. You can see the clean pile grew. And then you can see them beginning to fill the excavation or the hole back in with clean soil here. And here you can see the soil was put in layers, but you can see the soil is almost filled back in here. The stockpile is getting smaller. We still have some contaminated piles here that we're waiting for results on, and the excavation has moved the dirty soil. The excavation has moved all the way down to this last bit being removed here. And there you see the site about as it stands today. It's a few feet below grade level, and the port is going to work with whoever the new tenants are to decide what kind of surface or what level fill, kind of structural fill needs to go in there to work with the new tenants. But we have a nice, almost clean site. There is a little bit of contaminated soil around the edges of this excavation. The port will continue to monitor both the areas where there's a little remnants of contamination and the groundwater until such time as all cleanup levels are met on the site. There's a small, let's see, can we go back to, he was asking about, I believe you're asking about this property here.
Yes.
So this property was once a bulk fuel plant. In fact, it was the bulk plant where the pipeline ended that went under the K-Ply building that caused this contamination. But the contamination on this site, we actually investigated this site a little bit to see if it was the source. It was not the source. There's some limited contamination on this site. Was not to the extent that we could blame it on this. The pipeline leaked about in this area, and that's where the source for the big K-Ply contamination came from. The little bit of contamination here, this piece of property could be cleaned up under our voluntary cleanup program, and the owner of Platypus actually entered the VCP project or VCP program, our voluntary cleanup program, for a short while, and got an opinion letter on what next steps are for that site. It could either be cleaned up under the voluntary cleanup program, or we could work with the owner of that property and do it under a formal process with an agreed order. We haven't had the resources to move on that property at this time, so there's no current plan for that property. Yes?
Where did the contaminated soil go?
The contaminated soil was trucked to Columbia Ridge landfill and the Wasco landfill in Oregon. 2 different landfills. Most of it went to Columbia Ridge.
Above the Columbia River.
Columbia Ridge is in central Oregon. Big landfill in central Oregon.
Where was the second site?
The second one was the Wasco landfill near the Dalles in Oregon. Yes?
Why was the contamination plume on the east side of the pipeline, not on both sides?
It had to do with the property. This used to be tidelands, and it was filled in the 1940s to build this property, to build it up so that a mill could be built there. It likely had to do with fill and preferential pathways.
Just when you talk about not having the resources at DOE to pursue the private landowner or to pursue, for example, certain aspects of the Rayonier site, taking certain steps that are more aggressive. Does that mean that that's because it's not in the budget this year, or it will never be in the budget, or it's something that has to be earmarked through some sort of how does that work?
Well, we definitely work on projects in a priority order, trying to take care of the worst ones first, and some of those smaller ones, just aren't on our list yet. Doesn't mean they won't ever be addressed.
Well, I think we're looking at the slug here. Really, I mean, how can it not be a priority? It's been too many years already to get it all done.
Are we talking Rayonier?
Yes, I think that's what
And I
we're
think
talking
Rayonier,
about.
but Rayonier is already a priority. It's on your books, and we have lots of resources we're using on it.
Well, because I thought, they didn't.
She's talking about the smaller side.
The small.
I asked both parts.
Yeah.
I just said,
She did.
Yeah, I asked about both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is,
Yes, Dorothy?
I'm forgetting, is EPA part of NERDA?
They are not. Okay, so we'll touch base on marine trades area here. Marine trades area is next door to K-Ply at number 5. And we've gotten pretty far in our cleanup process with marine trades. We've gotten through remedial investigation, through an interaction, through the feasibility study. Right now we're on the draft cleanup action plan. For marine trades area, the marine trades area was named such because we have marine businesses there. That's why it's called that. And we have Platypus and Westport Marine currently on the marine trades area site. I'm showing you a red boundary here, and this is the marine trades area boundary. This is the K-Ply, part of the K-Ply clean, which we've addressed with the K-Ply cleanup. Okay, so ignore that side of the screen. This is the marine trades area, and what we have here is a gasoline plume with the darker blue being higher concentrations and the lighter blue being lesser concentrations. At marine trades, we have gasoline, diesel, and those components of gasoline, like benzene, are also present. What's different about marine trades is that we have active businesses and newer buildings on top of this. So most of that plume there is underneath the Westport facility, which is an operating business in your community. And we need to look at different types of cleanup options for this site. I'll point out also down here that there's the old headed oil site down here in the corner was also a bulk fuel plant. There were 4 bulk fuel plants within this footprint in the past, 4 different bulk fuel plants here. So right now we have liable parties, the port, once again for owning this piece of property. Chevron and Arco have also been named, Atlantic Beachville or Arco have been named potentially liable parties on this site. So there was an interaction back in 2002 on this site when the Westport Marine building went up. So they were in construction, realized there was some contamination there. They removed some of the soil from under the building, but addressed this mostly with a vapor barrier that's underneath that building to protect the workers within that building. Characterization of this site wasn't completed in 2012. We finished the remedial investigation feasibility study in 2013. We brought that here, that we had it out for public comment. And then in 2014, the port submitted a draft cleanup action plan, or the port and Chevron, who are both on the current agreed order, presented a cleanup action plan. At that time, we knew K-Ply was ready to go with the cleanup, and we wanted to move fast on K-Ply so that we could turn over that valuable piece of shoreline. So we actually set aside our draft cleanup action plan for a while and worked through the K-Ply cleanup. We are now ready to move back to the draft cleanup action plan. We actually had gone through one set of revisions on it already with a second revised one in 2015. We're picking that back up this year and hoping to get that finished. Here, because we have the remedial investigation feasibility study already finished, we already know what the preferred alternative from the feasibility study was. A big component of this is these double rows of wells here, which will be an air sparging system. And I'm going to explain that more on the next slide. I have a slide that will show how that works. But in effect, this will form a curtain preventing that contaminated groundwater from reaching the bay. We have the vapor barrier under the building already, and we have some source contamination in soil back here at the Pettit Oil facility. So there'll be a source removal of soil down there, as well as some extraction wells here, which will help us extract some of the product from the groundwater. Here's a schematic that shows you a little bit how that air sparging system works. And it's also going to be used in combination with a soil vapor extraction system. So the key here is that gasoline and petroleum hydrocarbon type products like to evaporate quickly. If you're ever around an open can of gasoline and you smell those fumes, gasoline likes to escape into the air. They volatilize or vaporize quickly. So even though we have contamination that's gotten down into our groundwater, this contamination groundwater would rather be in air. So we pump air down through a series of wells down into the groundwater. And then as the air is forced down into the groundwater and bubbles back up through the groundwater and the wet soil, the contamination moves into the air, moves into the air bubbles, because it would rather be in air. And as it moves up through the air, there's another system. We're looking at a cross section here, but there'll be trenches and pipes, and they will basically vacuum the air out of the soil, collecting that contamination. And then that is piped into a treatment system, like a big filter that will help remove that contamination from the air. that make sense? And the idea is that these 2 rows, this curtain at the bulkhead will clean the groundwater before it reaches our harbor. The next steps on this plan, Ecology will complete that draft cleanup action plan. Again, that's an ecology document. Ecology has the final say. Though we, at this point, are probably going to go along with this preferred cleanup option that was presented. Again, because we have an operating business there, we can't do the dig and haul like we did at Cape Fly, so we have to attack this in a different way. We'll negotiate an agreed order with the Port, Chevron, and ARCO to get this cleanup work done, and there'll be a public comment period. I'm optimistic that this might happen this year. And we can finalize that agreed order and cleanup action plan so that the port can get this site cleaned up. This air sparging is a slower remedial technique. They will probably need to operate that air sparging system for quite a number of years. Maybe, I know we've estimated 20 or 30 years that curtain may have to operate for all of that residual contamination is remediated. Any other questions on marine trades? Just a few more for you. Oh.
I was just going to say, so you've got the marine trades, you really can't clean it up per se because you can do what you can because there's existing wonderful people working and employed there. But we got back to Rayonier, it's empty, let's clean it up. It's valuable land, you said Cape Fly was valuable, but the Rayonier site is valuable as well as the dock. It can be used for cruise ships coming in,
That's true.
So you gotta think about that. Cape Island's valuable, but so is Rayonier. And our town it would be wonderful to be able to utilize that area. So.
I do hear the dock has some issues though. It's not quite as strong as you might think.
Yeah, it's a nice piece of property.
Yeah. So Unical's here at number 6. It was also a bulk fuel plant. There were 8 of these bulk fuel plants in that area of town. Unical has had some interaction work done on it, and we're now preparing the remedial investigation. The liable party here is Chevron. Back in, in the early, I've forgotten the date, 2002, somewhere in there, there was an interaction at this site where we knew there was some gasoline and free product. That means there's enough gasoline that it floats on the groundwater in the wells. A system of trenches and an extraction well was put in at the time and was operated for a few years and was able to move some of that product until that system collapsed. It has gone through some different characterization efforts since then. In 2015, Chevron submitted a draft remedial investigation report, and our review of that report showed some data gaps. Though we had the bulk of the contamination characterized, there were some areas around the edges where we still weren't sure where those boundaries were, and we weren't sure how far down gradient the groundwater went. So we're sending them back out in the field. They've turned in a supplemental work plan to do some more borings and put in some more monitoring wells. We've approved that plan, and I touched base with them today. They're planning to be out doing that additional work at the end of this month. They've told me they were going to be out in the field by the 22nd of this month. So that's good to hear that they're out. They were having a little trouble getting access issues to some of their surrounding neighbors. But those have been obtained and they're ready to go out in the field. So they will then prepare an agency review draft, remedial investigation, ecology reviews and comments, then they turn in a public review draft. As long as that meets our standards, we'll be out to you guys. Oh, sorry, this one they're doing just the remedial investigation first, and they're going to turn that in, then they're going to do the feasibility study. So once we get both of those documents ready, we're going to come out to a public comment with you guys. The agreed order they're under right now only requires these two documents. It doesn't require the draft cleanup action plan. So we'll need another agreed order to get the draft cleanup action plan and the cleanup done. And Ecology writes that draft cleanup action plan, so we don't always need the liable party to do that initial draft. We can write that one ourselves and then just get an agreed order and implement the plan. Any questions about UNICAL? Yes?
Where is that site in relation to the historical shoreline? And of course, I'm asking because of possible artifacts.
So I do know that the original shoreline and even the mouth of the original Tumwater Creek here, the original Tumwater Creek, we have some data that shows that it came down the valley here and turned and exited in this area. And the shoreline, the original shoreline or tidal flats would have passed through the UNICAL site. So it again, almost all of these sites here are built on fill. Okay, good question. Through that. So I wanted to touch base with you about two new sites. Number 8 here is a Shell Oil, one of those other 8 bulk fuel plants. We're trying to get to all of them here. And number 9, which was an old cardlock station. In our database, it's called the Pettit Oil Tumwater Truck Route site. Pettit Oil operated that truck for that cardlock for a few years, along with a variety of owners. Right now, the port owns both of these pieces of property, and they did some independent investigation of these two properties. And this is the Shell bulk fuel plant. This is where the old bulk fuel tanks used to sit, and the loading pump rack over there. And this was the cardlock station that had underground tanks. All these tanks have now been removed, and there was a soil removal at this cardlock station when these tanks were removed. But they didn't get it all. So the port has gone in and done some additional investigation to see the condition of these sites. Found a little bit of contamination. We have one spot here, one of the samples here that showed up with some contamination. We have a couple spots here that showed up with contamination. The red here is gasoline and the green is diesel. So the port has come to us and said they would like to address these. These are smaller cleanups, but the port has stepped up and said we want to take care of this and get these sites taken care of. So we're looking at doing some quick agreed orders with the port. They'll do a quick work plan to characterize those and take care of those sites. Anything else? Yes, Tony?
So in all of this, all the documents that should be coming out this year and next year, what would be the first one? And when would you return and talk to the community? Do you have a grasp on that?
Marine trades area.
Oh, yeah, marine trades area is a cleanup action plan.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. We still have to negotiate an agreed order with the port for that work, but that may be the first one. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the good comments, for your participation.